AI, at the end of the day, is a tool to achieve your business outcome.
One size certainly does not fit all in context of how AI is utilized.
It's an effervescently, awesomely changing thing constantly.
Hello and welcome to Cisco SE Talks, where we put a lot of our big partners, our largest partners, in the hot seat. I'm really excited for this episode, and I'm your host, Zain Mirza, because today we're bringing CDW, one of the largest Cisco partners, local to us here in Chicago. But I'm also joined today by Jason Gooley, who's going to be partnering with me. So, Jason, over to you, sir.
Hello, thanks for having me, Zane. This is going to be an exciting episode. My name is Jason Gooley. I've been with Cisco for a little over 13 years and been doing Cisco stuff for 32-ish years. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating is the increase of innovation all across the board. And AI is going to be definitely one of those. And I'm excited to talk about it today with CDW. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And I think we'll go to Joe, as well as Cody, who are joining us too. So it'd be great to do a quick introduction, Joe and Cody, and as we kind of kick off and have a great session really about AI and how IT integrates with AI as well.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Joe Chenevey. I work in CDW's hybrid infrastructure practice focused on AI solutions. And very specifically, in a lot of contexts, I focus on the infrastructure, but talk all the way up to the stack in terms of all the AI solution sets.
And good morning, everyone. I am Cody Weaver coming at you from sunny Madison, Wisconsin today. I am the Cisco AI Team Lead here at CDW. Been here for about 15 years. Similar to Joe, I'm a national resource focused on aligning our customers' business outcomes towards Cisco AI solutions. And I can talk all the way from the infrastructure level all the way up to data strategy.
So as we kind of kick off, and Jason, I'll go to you because a lot of these conversations you have, and you'll kind of talk through them a little bit, is when we look at just IT and AI, right? It's a big inflection point. A lot of what we see is security. Like, how does security align with IT, especially as they make this move into AI, right? And a lot of times we kind of hear that maybe it's a skill set issue, or maybe it's a security issue, and maybe it's a little bit of both, right? So I would love to kind of talk through your feedback, Joe, and as well as you as well, Cody, of what you guys are seeing. You guys deal with a lot of partners across many verticals, a lot of customers across other verticals as well. So would love your feedback there.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that is that the number one question that I keep getting is that, what are we going to do to secure all of this in the AI world, right? And I think a lot of it is there's that fear, right? There's the fear of no matter how good I get, somebody's using AI to get worse, right? And I think that's going to be that spy versus spy, cat and mouse thing kind of forever now, because we could use these tools to protect us, but at the same time, the bad folks can use the tools to get at us. And I think it's just going to be this thing forever, only because of how fast this has evolved. And I think it's going to be one of those things that when you're thinking about how you secure things, the only thing that's going to be able to scale with that many threats is not going to be humans, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think in a lot of contexts, a lot of those considerations around security and governance are based on the outcome that the customers that we're talking to want to achieve, respective of their use of AI. And so in a lot of cases, we'll try to really dig as quickly as possible into conversations around what that actual customer outcome is that they're looking for. Because I'll just say, if it's something focused on revenue generation or efficiency, kind of the solution set and kind of like the guardrails around that solution set may be different. So one size certainly does not fit all in context of how AI is utilized, whether that involves generative AI, traditional machine learning, or what have you. And so understanding that outcome and working back from that to understand that context, the use cases, drives a lot of those considerations that Jason noted about security and governance, because we really can't have an informed conversation until we understand what the customer is looking to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I can add on to that as well, you make a great point there around what outcome the customer is looking to see and where in their IT infrastructure they're trying to implement these solutions. We talk a lot about core infrastructure. You might think about your switches, your routers, your site infrastructure, servers, so on and so forth, and how those are interfaced with. And AI may play a big role in being able to troubleshoot, address, monitor, observe metrics from all of these ecosystems. But you've also got the IT infrastructure that is the end user, right? They may be on laptops. In medical settings, they may be going from room to room. They may be doing telepresence monitoring. And these situations require AI solutions that can reach out to that end user's point to be able to help troubleshoot and augment solutions. But how do you make sure that you're secure all the way to that endpoint? How do you make sure the endpoint itself is secure? This is one of the areas where we feel like Cisco is always able to tell a strong story because they have zero trust technology in their core veins of their product solution stack that help provide that full solution to make sure not only are we doing AI in the core securely, but we're also doing AI at the edge and in the endpoint securely.
Yeah, Cody, that's a good point, and I think if we just unpack that for a second, with IT, right, and security in general, guardrails, something that Joe you mentioned, how to have the correct guardrails and the different sort of personas you talk to. So talking through that a little bit, when you're talking about AI, you're not necessarily just talking about the network folks, right? It kind of encompasses with the sec DevOps, the net DevOps, and those use cases change as well. So would love to kind of unpack of what you're hearing as we walk into those different personas that are candidly not the traditional personas that we often talk to.
It's interesting because I think what we saw in the previous 2 to 3 years, a lot of those conversations around how these solutions would be implemented were started in our customers' lines of business. So depending on I'll just say, depending on what industry our customer is within, largely drove the decision on who was leading those initiatives. And that also impacted kind of like the framing of where it would run, what infrastructure would be required. And it was often the case that when the lines of business initiated those initiatives from an AI perspective, considerations around security were secondary. Governance might have been secondary as well. But now that we're in 2026, we're seeing this inflection of broadening out kind of like the application of use cases. And now a larger group of our customers are seeing IT now being given the mandate to own IT and AI initiatives and the operations of those solutions. So now those conversations are shifting back to IT, which is why we're now focused very heavily on helping our IT stakeholders have the relevant conversations around those topics, saying because it is important because IT has traditionally owned operations. And so now that AI as an initiative is coming to IT ownership, now it's really top of mind for our IT stakeholders, and we're trying to enable those stakeholders to reach back out to the lines of business where oftentimes the developers are sitting, and then having the appropriate context to say, okay, how do we do this thing from a systematic standpoint?
No, and I think it's something that Jason and I often talk about, right? And Jason, I know we'll go to you on a couple of questions that you had for both Joe and Cody. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about, Cody or Joe, you guys here. How is IT AI use cases different than what I might see in a retail customer? So candidly, I cover one of the biggest retail customers here in Illinois, and a lot of their AI presence is in the cloud, and we're slowly seeing them coming back. From a full cloud model to a hybrid model to eventually on-prem. So talk to us a little bit about what you see from the IT side, because IT is a firestorm, especially with AI, right? And some of the governance that you hit on earlier.
If I may start with some of the conversations I've been having there, I think where a lot of the persona starts to change is that when you are talking a lot with businesses making line of business decisions about the incorporation of AI, you're talking very much about business directed strategies on, how are we going to improve productivity? How are we going to lower operational cost? When you talk to IT, you're really getting personal. Right, they're very concerned with how do we increase our mean time to resolution? How do we implement this particular change methodology faster? How do we make sure that security guardrails are being made in place so I can pass my yearly audits? These things become very close to the people that are actually consuming AI. And one of the things that I've mentioned before is there is probably not a greater error that you can have in AI when you deploy an AI system and say, here's the thing, all the users now adopt to this. Stanford has some great research on this from their human-centered AI initiative to really show the improvement in outcomes that occur when you focus on how people work rather than what the AI is currently able to do. And the things that are going to determine what successful AI initiatives are, especially within the IT space, is how close you come to being able to answer and operate in the pattern that humans working in IT need to operate in, and being able to be there to reduce that friction and increase that velocity for them to get through their workday.
Yeah, I also think it's a matter of looking at framing the KPIs, because in a lot of cases, when we're dealing with as an example, in your example around retail, those retail KPIs, I'll categorize as like front office KPIs. They're really dealing about how many customers are we resolving their issues with, or how much revenue are we generating on a per customer basis, or what have you, right? So they're very front office focused in terms of like revenue generating KPIs. But when we're talking and the shifting back now, kind of like in framing with IT, now we're starting to get into a little bit more around efficiency KPIs, right? How much percentage improvement are we seeing in a workflow? How much percentage improvement are we seeing in resolution time? So that shift fundamentally has been again, a traditional area that IT has been focused on around efficiencies, because it helps enable the front office do their things from a revenue standpoint. But it's very important to understand kind of like that shift, because it frames how IT looks at solving some of the problems that it inherently has. And these front office use cases are invariably different from, I'll just say, internal IT use cases. So IT is focused on, as an example, right? Mean time to repair. It's a focus on operational efficiencies, observability, availability, cyber resilience. Those type of metrics are very important because it talks about keeping the business running. And so how AI is utilized in achieving those things can be very different substantially from how the AI system or solution is devised for a front office application, or front of the house application. So the retail customer experience is going to be much different from the experience that an IT stakeholder will want to have for an AI solution that solves AI use cases for IT.
Yeah, it's good feedback, and it's sort of what we see with, like, for example, retail and manufacturing, because with IT, as you kind of mentioned, Joe and Cody, the security factor is top of mind because of different components you kind of touch that layer on top of it, right? So I do really appreciate that, and I just can think about a million different use cases just talking about IT and AI that I've experienced, right? That SE's experienced, and when we talk to our customers. So Jason, I know you had a few questions as well, so I'll go to you. Kind of ask the team, and I know you have a lot of great experience covering with customers all over, especially in Illinois, even in Wisconsin. So go to you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the questions that I was going to ask, and this is something, I see a lot of customers as well, and when you go and talk to a customer, the initial feedback that I saw was that customers don't want you to walk in there and go, so what are you doing with AI? right? Because that talk track it's stale, right? And they're looking for us to come in and say, this is what we're seeing with customers doing AI, and this is what we think that might benefit you from a business and use case perspective, right? And one of the things that me and Zane kind of joke about this a lot is that, it seems like every 5 years, it kind of changes. Like 5 years ago, it was automation programmability. 5 years before that, it was IoT. And it seems like every 5 years is central, edge, central, distributed, centralized, edge, cloud, prem, high, it just seems like it's constantly doing this, right? And I think that the reason that happens is because of all the innovation. But my question for you was, when you're going in to talk to the customers and get that initial conversation about discovery for the use cases, how do you approach that conversation? Because walking in and saying, what are you doing with AI doesn't necessarily work. And then the other second point to that is neither do silos anymore. So in order for all these cool things that we're talking about for AI and security and all these things to work together, the business kind of has to work together in ways that they haven't before. And then limited by their imagination is, what do you want to do with all this? And how do we get to the table with the customers and say, look, these are things that we see that might be beneficial to you. So I'll leave that. That's a long question, but I think you get where I'm going with it.
Yeah, if I may take a start at this, one of the things that I want to mention is I feel like I'm kind of in a pretty privileged position there, because from the Cisco perspective, I get to discuss and get brought in a lot around conversations that have a large portion of that Cisco portfolio somewhere in the business, whether it is in network, collaboration, security, or traditional data center. And I want to mention that because I think for a lot of my conversations, a lot of the process there starts with the same human interaction we've always had, which is, tell me what you're trying to solve, not necessarily like, hey, this is how we can come in and let AI change your life. Tell me what you're doing in your business, and let's talk about what areas are your priority to try to solve. AI itself, as we've discussed, can position itself in a data center, on the edge, on your phone. It is ubiquitous at this point and only growing. Where you try to tackle those challenges are really focused on what is that business trying to accelerate, do differently, and improve upon. And instead of saying, well, hey, here's a new app that we can deploy, or here's some new infrastructure we can send, now we have in our tool bucket to say, here's this either generative AI or machine vision or capability that we can begin to introduce to solve your business's challenge of, you're trying to see store foot traffic, you're trying to minimize part defects, you're trying to increase knowledge-based retention rates. These are all areas now where an AI conversation can fit in as a solution to those challenges. But it doesn't start with, hey, here's this solution, let's put that in and then find out what your problem is.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think in a lot of contexts, if you don't work back from the problem statement, whatever solution that you think you had in mind probably isn't going to stick. It probably doesn't relate as well. And inevitably, I think our stakeholders, whether they're the traditional IT stakeholders or the business stakeholders that we talk to from a customer basis, they know that too, right? They have an inherent sense of where the issue is. And so we have to be very cognizant of pulling that out, because without that context, it doesn't really help us help the customer, because that potential solution set is just way too broad. So the way that we've sort of framed kind of like the broad buckets of where AI may be positioned, in terms of the marketplace, and I'm talking about the overall market of AI solutions, is huge. It is broad. It's changed and only increased in the last 3 years. Since 2022, the amount of different products or solutions that are out there in the marketplace that customers have to understand has exponentially grown in 4 years. And that is a fact, right? There are new startups almost every single year that are marketing to a niche use case or a niche problem that they're solving. So without understanding the problem that we need to solve on behalf of the customer, we don't necessarily know what we have within our portfolio of solutions and services that we can offer to the customer. So inherently, where this traditionally began like 3 or 4 years ago with like certain like platforms embedding AI as a feature, like GitHub Copilot or Microsoft Copilot or any of the Copilots, has changed fundamentally. Now that we have like a lot of open source availability, not only on the models themselves, but individual platforms. And then we also have customers who are wanting to build their own solutions. And so very specifically, we have to understand what it is that they're trying to solve, to understand whether we have something within the portfolio around AI as a feature, within the portfolio that AI is the product itself, and we have that within our within the context of our Cisco partnership, or whether the customer is going to look to build something and create or utilize AI as a factory, where they're actually going to produce some sort of meaningful output for their business. All of those categories, those 3 categories, the individual components within that may be different. And that's why if we don't know the problem, we don't know which of those areas that we need to start with the conversation. And invariably, we know that customers in our conversations over the last several years, they're going to pick and choose and probably have elements of all 3 of those, because one solution, as I said before, doesn't fit every single use case or every single problem.
Yeah. I'm going to double click because, I'm on a roll here. You mentioned a word 3 times in there that is very important, and I'm going to throw it out there for everybody listening and for Cody to comment on as well, both of you, is context, right? How does context play a role in what is critical for customers with AI? And when you think about that, think about it not only just context of talking about in terms of what the customer is looking for from an outcome, but also context in the sense of MCP. Does anybody want to talk on that? Because I think that's another thing that's really important that customers are trying to get their head around. And why I say you're limited by your imagination is because of the context. I think if you have a mindset, I wouldn't say brain, I would brain set, but that's not a word, a mindset that can look at certain areas from a macro level and be like, if I work at a manufacturing company, I can see that, units, like you mentioned, productivity out on these specific shifts, damages, and I'll give you a quick example that we saw at Cisco Live is they had a machine set up that had Epiphone Gibson guitars going around in circles. And they had Splunk dashboards, ITSI dashboards, monitoring these things. They had all the IoT devices, all driven by AI. And as it went through, it would inspect the devices, see if there's any chips in the paint, any cracks, anything. And then a Fanuc robot would literally pick a string and then tune it. And it would show it up on the screen. And the context there is looking for issues of things that aren't working right in your production line. How fast can we get these things tuned and out? Are there things that are not fixable? Like if there's a big dent in it, that's not going to go out to a customer. So context is very important. So I'm gonna shut up for a second, and then I'll turn it back over to you both and talk about the relevancy of context in AI.
Yeah, it's extremely, no pun intended, contextual. Because what we're seeing is where the world started with, I'll just say, trying and experimenting with large frontier models, from OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude models, where they're very large models. In a lot of cases, you had to really engage with those models through the model API. But where we're seeing now, I'll just say the expansion of the reality of how AI is applied is the application or the use case dictates the model selection and essentially the model size. So smaller models may be better at accomplishing a given use case or a task than a larger model. And from an economic standpoint, in terms of token generation, the token costs, and that everything that goes with that, whether a model is self-hosted or you're dealing with a model API. So that's very, we have to understand that. And I think customers are starting to pick up on that, is that in order to make things more efficient, both from a cost and I'll just say efficiency and productivity standpoint, model selection is key. The input that you give or the context that you give the model is also critical, because where models can be very good at one thing. You choose the wrong model for that application or that task, it could give you, I'll just say, not accurate results. So context is important. Feeding the relevant data into or engaging with a model for it to do some sort of work, summarization, classification, identification, whatever it is, still is important. So the fundamentals of how you utilize models and which models you use hasn't changed. What has changed is the selection of which model.
Mhm.
Customers are no longer necessarily having to rely on frontier models alone. They can rely on open source models and also self-host those models within their own data centers in order to arrive at meaningful outputs. That context in terms of how it's used, which model you select, the information that you ingest or feed to the model in order for it to provide some sort of meaningful logic or reasoning now becomes more important. Customers are now starting to realize that, and CDW is helping to think through some of those things. And Jason, one of the things you mentioned, MCP. So Model Context Protocol, which was introduced by Anthropic, I think in 2024, has essentially become kind of like the de facto standard method for how enterprises are going to engage in enterprise data sources. So regardless of where the model is, whether we're talking like, let's say, a frontier model API or a self-hosted model, open source, that's run in the data center, those data sources are invariably now increasing to external enterprise data systems. And that engagement is going to be through tool calling, through MCP. Now, MCP as a protocol is great at being able to kind of like build the framework or like define the framework on how to engage with enterprise systems and enterprise data sources. What it hasn't been great at is securing that access, how it's done, and all the guardrails that necessarily need to go behind it, and then also kind of like the observability on how that's working. So that's where a lot of now, I think, big IT focus is. How do we implement a system that utilizes model tool calling through MCP? How do we do that right in order for us to provide the proper guardrails? That is fundamentally an IT issue to ensure that it's done correctly, which is why we're in front of customers, advising them, MCP is probably going to be one of the primary methods that, you are going to implement, an AI solution in terms of interaction with data. So do it right. And here are some of the solutions and considerations you need from a security and governance perspective.
Yeah, Joe, I'm glad you said that because it goes back to one of the main components of AI and just this evolution and this constant idea of change, right? And it's changing so fast. So things like MCP that Anthropic obviously released, it's a newer technology, right, that we've used, but we're kind of seeing how it's adapting over time and how to bring other technologies as part of that as well. There's another notion that, Jason and I often hear about is the notion of lean IT, right? Of managing an entire sort of enterprise with a few number of folks, right? And so how do you do that? So obviously Cisco's talked about bringing together assurance, observability with AI Canvas, right? And bring it all together in one. And I'm sure it's something you guys often see as well. But it just goes back to the fluidity of change and how fast the world of AI is changing. And it's an exciting time to be in technology. It's an exciting time to be at Cisco, and it's exciting to kind of partner with you guys at CDW. So with that, I kind of want to jump into one of the really exciting portions of the podcast, and it's a little game that we play here. It's called Two AI Facts and a Hot Take, where you all, Joe and Cody, are going to put Jason in the hot seat. Again, this is unscripted, and we're going to talk about some statements that you guys have put together, and really talk about how AI is impacting us in our everyday world as well. So with that, I'll go to you, Joe, to kick off, and then Cody can have you kind of take the hot seat as well.
Okay, all right. So you're gonna have to guide me here, Jason. I can give you both facts at once or one at a time, and then I can give you my hot take at the very end.
Well, let's do one at a time, and then we'll hot take it at the end.
Okay, all right. I'm going to start with my fact one. So, fact one, AI infrastructure spend has officially become a macro force. Morgan Stanley estimated approximately like 2.9 trillion in data center construction alone through 2028. So AI data center power and the demand for power and the construction of new data centers specifically for AI is on track to double electricity consumption or energy consumption by 2030. So that's amazing. So we're no longer talking about this very little niche thing called AI. It's not a niche thing anymore. It's a macro force. So tech spending has fundamentally shifted around AI being like a driver, and not only a driver just for technology, but a driver for the entire macro economy. Right. Wow. Fact two. Right. This is very recent. So last week, I think around March 24th, Google Research broadly introduced a new algorithm that they call TurboQuant. So the actual research paper was published in ArcSiv about this time last year, but essentially TurboQuant is a new compression algorithm that shrinks LLM key value cache by 6x, fundamentally allowing better efficiency in terms of use of models and how big these models have to be in order to accomplish a given task. So fundamentally now customers are able to use the infrastructure that they build around AI in a much more efficient fashion. So that introduces some interesting things as far as what we're going to see in the next couple of years on what can a customer do, what infrastructure size do they really need to accomplish a task. So a lot of dynamic things. The world is changing almost every 3 months in terms of new updates and new innovations. So those two things alone, I think, are really interesting, and I wanted to kind of bring that out.
I'm going to say two things real quick. One is the first one is one of those things where you don't even realize the scale of this until you start dealing with things like power and all that. And when you said, we're talking to customers all the time, we've been doing data center tours and neocloud tours and all this other stuff. And when they start talking about power and the fact that I live out in the middle of nowhere, about 2 hours west of Chicago, west of Rockford, Illinois, a lot of farm, and a lot of farm out here is turning into solar and wind farms. And those solar and wind farms, they're hauling all the power back to Chicago to feed data centers, right? And they're starting to build AI data centers way out here by us, right? And I think that's just one of those things that we weren't expecting. We weren't expecting it to take off like that. The second thing you said was kind of interesting, because when you think about having this new AI and the capability of doing things in a more efficient manner, like 6xing and things like that, if you think about that, that almost makes me raise my question about, well, if we're getting that mumuch more efficient, how does that power and liquid cooling and all that go? Or is it, instead of we're getting 6 times more efficient, we're just going to keep jamming more in it, and we're going to need even more power and cooling?
Yeah,
because we're
I think it's a matter of the latter, because
nobody's going to want to slow down.
Yeah, we all have heard of, hopefully we've all heard of Jevons paradox. The Jevons paradox says if you make something more efficient, there's more demand for its use. So I think in a lot of contexts, which is why I kind of marry those two facts together, data center and power consumption is increasing, but we've got this new technology that makes running models more efficient from a memory usage. So you would think that, okay, now that means less demand. But I think what we're going to see is more demand, right? As inference becomes more efficient, more use cases will come out. Customers will want to apply it more. So that's Jevons paradox. And I think we're going to see that more and more inevitably with AI solutions.
So let me ask one quick follow-up on that. Part of this paradox is, does that mean that we're starting to see all of those other lines of business that we've been talking about kicking in the budget? Because IT always gets crunched at the end, right? They don't have the money. They have to keep the lights on. And now they're being asked to manage, monitor, secure, and guardrail all this AI stuff because the business needs it. Are we starting to see more of the business funding these AI initiatives from other lines of business versus than just IT?
Well, I'll say absolutely. At least in the last 3 years, I think lines of business have taken more of the initiative to fund. And as more use cases shift back to IT, I think IT now is in a great place to say, hey, look, we'll continue to make things more efficient, but we still need the funding in order to take some of these things to expand the use cases. So again, it's going to be a better cooperation going forward between the lines of business and IT on how we accomplish these things, because inevitably, as things become more efficient and they run more efficiency, that opens up the gamut for more use cases.
Yep, appreciate that, Joe. And I know, Cody, you have a few things to bring up and put Jason on the hot seat a bit more. So I will go to you for a second here.
All right, are we starting with the 2 facts and then the hot take, Jason?
Yeah, why not? Let's random it. Let's do it whatever way you feel.
Doesn't have to choose.
Let's flip it up a little bit.
I'm holding my hot take to the very end because I want to hear your hot take.
Ooh,
All right. First one here. Most of the intelligence gains in our AI systems come from higher scale, better data quality, and better training techniques rather than fundamental new architectures.
Okay. Is that a fact or a hot take?
Oh, are you going to choose? You gonna tell me your guess?
So I think in a way it's a fact. And it also is a hot take to some degree, because you have to see where all these things are kind of evolving and then the movement of it all. Because Joe just mentioned it earlier, right? Every 3 months, it seems like every 3 months, but it feels more like every week and a half or so. Like it's just next thing you know, somebody buys a new AI company or something happens, and it's just like now we all have to start running fast again. And so, yeah, I would think that it's probably a fact is my guess, but
yes. That's a fact.
Hot take
yes, as Joe did say, right? As we are increasing the amount of scale and how much infrastructure we're building, we're getting better training quality, we're getting larger parameter sizes, and we're also doing nifty things to be able to squeeze more of these data sets into the same limited infrastructure we have. But the fundamental aspect of key transformations that we use to do AI has had limited change. So we're going to continue building scale and trying to be smarter with the scale we build as our main techniques to try and get better, more intelligent AI systems.
Awesome.
All right, how about this one? Inference is far more expensive at scale than training.
That's true. That is a fact. And I'd say that as a fact only because what we started to realize, and I'm assuming you see this a lot, right, is how much of that is actually now starting to move either to the edge, and the folks who were trying to do that inferencing in the cloud back to the edge and stuff became very pricey. And inferencing is kind of where you're getting your value, right? So I think that's one of those things that you see as it takes off, that customers are trying to solve for inference. But then even with like the unified edge and stuff like that, we're starting to see that we're pushing a lot of that stuff down to the edge where you're collecting the data. It was, I don't know, you probably remember, was this 5, 10, 15 years ago when we were doing this, but fog computing, remember that?
Yes.
It's fog computing, edge churning of data. We're there again. And it's this in and out thing. So
and to your point, Jason, there are a lot of entities out there, we might call out Tesla, for instance, that are building AI as a product. And training is a key part of creating, producing, and maintaining their product. So they're kind of outliers in that force. But in the vast ecosystem of AI, right, it's using that product of training. It is focused on every edge device, every mobile device, every endpoint system in front of us that's using it. So when we continue and we see, of course, NVIDIA's announcements from GTC kind of echoing that as well, so many of these modern technologies, this modern infrastructure is focused on how do we extract more performance out of inference, because that is the majority of the workload that is going to be at scale in the AI ecosystem.
Yep, absolutely. That's absolutely.
And then I'll give you one more here, and it might be making it obvious, but most AI projects are failing. Demos and dashboards do a good job of hiding it.
Yes, that is a third fact and a hot tip. Right. It's so funny because you talk to a lot of different customers, and the drawback is this. Let's be honest here, right? We're not the first ones to probably go talk to them about this technology. And the problem there is everybody wants to go talk to everybody about the technology, but that causes confusion, and it causes almost like disrupting by options. Well, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. And that's why I say, your imagination is your limitation. But the problem is, it's almost like sharks in the water to some degree, right? And it's funny that I said that because my son made me this, and I just happen to have it sitting here, a little shark. But it's like sharks in the water because everybody's coming out of everywhere to be able to say, hey, no, you should do this, you should do that. I want to be relevant. I want to have that value add. I want to, and in reality, businesses are just trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. At the same time, they're trying to keep their lights on. So it's very tough because you mentioned lean IT. It's also now we have shadow AI popping up all over the place. And that's why things like AI defense are important to be able to figure out how you're going to guardrail it. So it's an effervescently, awesomely changing thing constantly. If that makes sense.
Yes. One of the challenges businesses are going to have to continue to get smarter about, and working with partners like CDW with, is stop treating AI as a business outcome. AI at the end of the day is a tool to achieve your business outcome. Those AI systems that are treated as a business outcome end up with human babysitting, right? Because they're not perfect. So they have a team of people behind them just supporting the outputs of them. They're supporting low value use cases, things where the energy cost of infrastructure to do it is not actually creating return on investment. And it's also creating very expensive prompt patterns, as instead of improving the data science or the model that they are focused on using, they're bringing in this bulk model, and then they're sending, a 90% prompt workload to this thing to get a very little amount of output. And a lot of that is because they chose a foundational model or similar that was the most ready to bring into the market, something they could deploy the most rapidly. And then the project stalled because they didn't have the outcome in mind in the first place. So now they're operating very expensive infrastructure with a poor return on investment. Yeah. You have to start with what is the outcome they're trying to achieve. Multimodal is multi-model now. Right. And we have to focus on the same data lakes, same data pools that might be supporting some ecosystems with tiny models at the edge may still have large foundational models answering larger questions at the core. It's a mixture of the two, and you can't solve it with just taking one myopic view.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree. I'm gonna give you a hot take because I think this builds on what you're talking about, and I'd like to see your reaction on this. Okay, here's my hot take, right? So the real agentic revolution did not start with the big frontier model builders, Anthropic, OpenAI, Mistral. It actually just kicked off a few months ago with one indie developer, Peter Steinberger, who vibe coded Claudebot, an open source AI task worker that ran on a Mac Mini and did real task work. Whether that you're talking about booking your flights, clearing your inbox, creating some actual code, it did all of these things on your behalf with fully autonomous workflows. So that really kickstarted the things. And if you trace like all the viral things that happen around, it changing its name to OpenClaw, and then being acquired by OpenAI as far as like an initiative, and then the whole thing around Notebook. But now look at where the world is at. There's been fast follows from Anthropic themselves with Claude Cowork, Perplexity Personal Computer, awesome. Copilot now also has like a co-work function that is always on. It does task work for you. So what we're going to see around this is now people are starting to realize, instead of like, these, just say ambiguous areas on what we're actually trying to accomplish, they're using these always on style of agentic solutions to do real task work on their behalf. And inevitably that is going to drive vast exponential growth in token generation. And token generation means additional costs. The customers are going to have to start fundamentally thinking through, where is it most economically viable to generate those tokens? Do I do that through like a model API where that cost is unbounded? Or do I control that by building an infrastructure and then framing my solution on economic choices, on model selection, parameter size, to the task or the workflow that is optimized for my business. So I think, again, hot take, but it goes into like a lot of these conversations we've had around where is the cost going to go? Where is inference going? How important it is for a customer to understand the outcome or the work that they need to do, where AI is a solution or a tool and not the actual end all be all.
Yeah, and I'll say this. And first of all, Jason, thank you for putting yourself in the spot. I think it made the conversation even more engaging, and thank you, Joe and Cody, as part of it as well. So as we kind of wrap and close, I wanted to first just thank you for your time today. I thought today was really, really engaging. It was really conversational, and I'm more excited more than ever. More excited about the partnership with CDW as well as what Cisco's doing to kind of bring it together. So thank you again for the time today. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope you all are excited as I am for the next episode where we bring in Splunk as well and kind of talk about the Cisco plus Splunk end-to-end story. Thanks for your time today, and hope to see you on the next episode. Thank you.